Hi, everyone. Welcome to another daily editorial here on the KE Report. This is a special daily editorial because it is more of a video interview, as we are getting an update from Capella Minerals, traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol CMIL. I'm chatting with the president and CEO, Eric Roth. Now, on the back of a number of the recent interviews that Eric and I have done focused on the company's transition into Scandinavia, both Norway and Sweden, and a couple different projects that the company has picked up, I received a lot of questions that I chatted with Eric about. We came up with a game plan of how to address these, and Eric put together a short presentation for all of us to walk through these questions. Now, Eric, we're going to start off with some general questions regarding Norway in terms of how much exploration is in Norway. Have there been any new copper mines either permitted or in construction or just started production? Eric, take it away, please, with more of this update on Norway. First and foremost, what's been going on in Norway from a resource exploration standpoint, please?
Yeah, thanks, Corey, and great to be back, and a big hello to all your listeners as well too. So as you mentioned in the introduction, so we'll have a slight change of tack here in terms of we will specifically look at the two high-grade copper assets that we've acquired in Norway. As you mentioned, we have had a lot of questions just in terms of obviously Norway isn't that well known as a jurisdiction, but obviously what I will do is I'll take people through some of the questions we've had and really just sort of confirm the view that basically it is a favorable jurisdiction to be in. The second thing is we'll look at the deposit types. We do talk a lot in our presentations about these VMS, these massive sulfide deposits. And, I guess people may be more familiar with porphyry type deposits, these big low grade deposits, but what we're talking about here is a much higher grade type deposit. So just to remind people what these VMS, these massive sulfide deposits are, and then we'll give you a quick update on the two projects, which are Løkken and Kjøli, and keeping in mind that both of these projects were former mining districts. They both closed in the mid-1980s. And an interesting thing happened in Norway in the mid-1980s. So these mines closed down for two reasons. One is that copper prices in the mid-1980s got to 60 cents a pound. And of course, currently copper prices are north of $4.50 a pound. But the second thing that was very specific to Norway was, of course, the discovery of oil. So what happened was, of course, oil generated so much revenue for the country that basically the mining industry was just left and it's been dormant for the last 40 years. And effectively what we've been seeing, Corey, is now that the government, there are very supportive government policies because they do realize that in this day and age of green technologies and green energy and all of this sort of thing, they do realize that their reliance on the income from oil will decrease with time as everybody looks for alternative energy sources. So there's been a lot of government support to build or to regenerate, if you like, new businesses. Now, in the case of Norway, the other question too is that keep in mind these operations were, the country has hundreds of years of production experience. I mean, both the Løkken mine and the Kjøli mine, these are operations that started in the mid-1600s. They basically were in production for 300 years. And so what we're talking about is a country that has a very rich mining history, and there is widespread acceptance of mining. And I think people have forgotten that this last 40 years, really, because of the oil boom, was an anomaly in Norway's history. So, but now, of course, as I mentioned, because of the declining reliance on oil going forward, there is a lot of support to bring back some of these mining ventures, and particularly in the copper space, because Norwegians are very pragmatic. As you're probably aware, like half of the vehicles sold in Norway are electric cars. They realize the copper has to come from somewhere. The EU as a general, and of course, Norway being an affiliate to the EU. Now, when you look at that, they have goals for zero emissions or emissions neutral by 2050. The only way you can do that is basically by accelerating some of these other businesses that help you reach those goals. So the EU as a general has all these goals for reducing emissions, and of course, reducing our reliance on oil is one of the key things of that. So just a couple of things too. We get a lot of questions, Corey, on Norway as a jurisdiction in terms of Okay, it's first-class infrastructure, so there's first-class general infrastructure. The second thing to keep in mind, the projects where we operate basically are old mines, so they have a lot of the old mining infrastructure there. So the country is a fantastic place. There's very, very good infrastructure all round. And that becomes very, very important when you get to the end point, which is after discoveries, and you come to the mine building phase. A lot of the infrastructure that you would normally have to build in yourself is already there. So that makes a huge benefit for pushing mining projects forward. Just at the corporate level too, I mean, people always ask us, is it an expensive country to operate? I would say if you look at the entire package, yes, salaries may be higher than in some other countries, but what you do see, there's a lot of other benefits. There's a very generous corporate tax rate of about 22%, very, very low energy costs because it's all hydroelectric power. There's no government royalties, although there is a 0.5% royalty to landowners. And as I mentioned, a lot of the infrastructure is already there. So when you look at the whole package, it's actually a very, very favorable place to be. The other question we get to is on permitting. And of course, you know, as I mentioned, because the industry's been dormant for the last 40 years, the last, I'll say 3 to 5 years, we've seen a lot of new exploration projects kick off again. You know, in the belts where we're operating, both at Kjøli and Løkken, there's a lot of companies now pushing projects forward. And I will mention too that there's one project in northern Norway called Nussir. It's a copper mine which was active, I believe, until about 1980. It has now got the permits to reopen and to rebuild the mine. So basically, permitting in Norway is working, and I think that's a key thing. So I guess the wrap up is it is a competitive environment to operate in, and we have a lot of government support and, of course, local support, because in these old mining districts, a lot of people, you know, grandfathers, people had family that worked in these mines, so they do understand the mining process.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's move on to some of the other questions that have come in regarding the type of deposits that you are looking for here. A VMS deposit, so Volcanic Massive Sulfide deposit. Do you have any experience in VMS deposits? And give our listeners a little bit of an update on what a VMS deposit is and why this is a focus for the company.
Sure, Corey. And I think these are, for a company of our size, these are very, very attractive projects. You asked about my specific experiences. For people who, I guess, were investing in the business about, you know, in the 1990s, I did work for a company called Ore Resources, which is spelled AUR, so a Toronto-based company that had the Louvicore massive sulfide discovery near Val d'Or in Quebec. And you know, that was really an amazing experience because it was a company maker for the company. Ore was an exploration company. They discovered this massive sulfide project. The resource or reserve at the end of the day was about 12 million tons at 4% copper equivalent, and it was a company maker. It spun off so much cash that at the end of the day, and of course, Ore did a fantastic job of operating that mine, that it then allowed them to grow, and the company grew and grew and grew, was able to acquire other projects, and was finally acquired by Teck for about 4 billion or so. So, you know, I mean, it's incredible that something like this, just because of the inherent value, the high dollar per ton value of these things, can generate a lot of cash for a company, and of course that then allows them to grow. I should also mention too, I guess, for people who followed us more recently in Mariana Resources with the Hot Marden project, that project actually lies right on the margin of a very important massive sulfide belt in Turkey as well. And so we've had a lot of exposure to these massive sulfides over the years. And just to take a step back, is what are they? Because, you know, a lot of people hear the term VMS but don't really know what it is. And these are just, I guess, simplistically, these are just high-grade base metal-rich deposits, and they typically have copper, zinc, and they'll often have gold and silver in them as well, which is the case what we have here. These are high-grade deposits that basically formed on the ocean floor. These were originally on the ocean floor as these black smokers. And I think that, as I say, the fantastic thing about these deposits is they're relatively compact. They're relatively small, each of the deposits, but they do occur in clusters. So you typically get a few of these together. They're very, very simple metallurgy in terms of the sulfides are very straightforward, which means that the processing is very straightforward, and effectively the end product from these mines ends up being concentrate. So, which of course is that's just off-the-shelf technology. There's nothing fancy about that. It's tried and proven technology. So, and the other thing too is, of course, because they're relatively compact deposits, they have small development footprints, which means that the permitting process, the process to actually go into production, is relatively straightforward. Another thing to keep in mind too, Corey, just if I look at the Scandinavian situation in general, the other thing too that is fantastic about these projects and where they're located. So you really have everything from the early stage. We have the projects, we have the potential. These are old mining districts with, potential for extensions to the old mine, plus lots of along strike extensions. But the attractive thing is you've got these fantastic projects. You're in a country where the jurisdiction works. It is favorable for mining, and of course, once you get the final product, you've actually got places to send the concentrate to, and you've got smelters both in Norway. You've got smelters in Sweden as well too. So so it's one of these things where you've got the whole package. You've got everything from the exploration ground all the way through to producing the concentrate, and then you've got somewhere to take that and produce the copper, basically, which is what we're looking for. So as an all-up package, it's a fantastic place to be.
Okay, let's move on to the projects then. Let's start with the Kjøli project. I want to get some short to medium term plans here. You and I recently discussed some AI targets that were generated on these projects. Can you give us a little bit more insight there? And again, really just summarize the short term, near term goals and plans at Kjøli.
Yeah, sure, Corey. And for your listeners who followed us recently, what we're looking at here on this slide basically is the result of this AI work, this artificial intelligence or data mining, really, if you like. And this is another one of the advantages of being in Norway too. That there are very extensive databases available for these districts, and in the specific case of Kjøli, for example, the government, the Geological Survey, actually spent a lot of money doing a lot of the basic work that we would normally have to do, for example, airborne geophysical surveys and things like that. And because there was such a fantastic database already here, and I should add the Geological Survey did that precisely as a way to bring exploration companies back in again. So, so again, this is one of the advantages of being in Norway. We have all this data available that you don't need to acquire because a lot of it has already been acquired and most of the time by the government. So, but that was kind of just a long-winded background to what we did present a few weeks ago, and we talked to the listeners about was this data mining exercise. The key thing, we've always talked about Kjøli having two former mines, the old Skillingdal mine in the southwest, the Kjøli mine in the middle. What the AI came up with is basically came up with a number. It came up with about 26 targets, which, and just to explain how this data mining works, what it does is it takes all the different parameters of a known deposit, and it says, okay, these are the signatures that we should see in all of the different components we're looking at. And it just uses those as calibration points for pretty well every other pixel in that project area. So what it's saying, so on this map that we're looking at on the left-hand side, all the hot colors, so all the reds and the magentas, the data mining is saying that has the same signature as known deposits in the district. And by its, through its algorithm, it's saying that all of those red dots they have a 98% probability of having over 1% copper in them. And what you do see out of that is basically some very large anomalies have come out, particularly to the north of the old Kjøli mine, where we have multiple, targets there of at least 2 kilometers each, which for these massive sulfide type deposits is quite a significant, response. That's a really significant anomaly. So going forward, the plan for us here, Corey, is to look at those priority targets. We'll tighten up the drill targets and basically just get those ready for drilling. And then the plan is to come in here and drill as soon as we can. So, one of the things we did mention too is that, Corey, people who have seen the full corporate presentation would have seen photographs of us standing on outcrops with 2% copper. This is what you see here. You can actually walk along that trend, that main sort of trend that goes through Kjøli, and actually walk on outcrops that have over 2% copper in them. It's really quite extraordinary, and with no drilling on them, basically, which is even more extraordinary. So So the plan basically is to move Kjøli towards drilling as quickly as we can, tighten up the drill targets, and then move towards drilling.
Okay, thank you for that update. Let's move over to Løkken then. Let's get some, again, of the near-term plans here. Potential for a discovery at Løkken. What was kind of the past drilling that happened while the mine was in operation? Bring everybody up to speed then. Løkken and the company's plans here.
Sure. And so, Corey, just as some background, so Løkken, just from a historical perspective, the old Løkken mine, the principal mine, which is in the center of the property here, was actually the largest massive sulfide deposit of its class anywhere. So it basically produced about 24 million tons at, it was about 2.3% copper, 1.8% zinc, and with gold and silver credits as well. So you know, it was a big beast. It was a big deposit for its class. And you know, and to give you an idea, again, coming back to the example of ore resources with the Løkken discovery, that was about half the size of what you know, of what Løkken was in its day. So, so our strategy now, Corey, is twofold. What you'll see on this property map on the left-hand side here is there's the old Løkken mine. Basically, current exploration is going to look for extensions to the old mine, but particularly what we're interested in, and coming back to this idea, this concept that these massive sulfides always occur in clusters, we're going to be focusing on some of these satellite bodies that are at surface that have had very, very little work done on them. So, and just to answer your question on the drilling, for example, Corey, the old Løkken mine has a fair bit of drilling in the mine itself. I mean, obviously where the production came from, but if you actually step back and look at some of these regional targets, there's actually very little information known on them. And therein lies the upside for us, because obviously the Løkken mine, it was such a big mine. It was, you know, keep in mind too, that it was 4 kilometers long. It reached the surface on the eastern side and was 1 kilometer deep on the west. I mean, a 4 kilometer long underground mine, it was a very significant deposit in its day. So, but of course, what wasn't tested, there was a lot of these satellite bodies that have a lot more work needs to be done on them, and you know, we feel there's very, very good potential to push these forward. And our target on both Løkken and Kjøli, and again using the Løkken example from ore resources, where the 12 million tons was more than enough to start building a mine. You know, we feel very strongly that because all the infrastructure that is here, anything north of 10 million tons is a deposit that can be turned into a mine here. So we see very good potential for doing that, both here at Løkken and also at Kjøli.
So one quick question just to wrap us up. In terms of drilling, you expecting to have a drill on the ground at either Løkken or Kjøli in the near term?
Yes, so that's the plan. So I guess now we're coming into the field season, Corey. So of course, so what we will be doing is tightening up the targets on the ground over the next couple of months. And then basically we'll look at the options for getting drilling in here as quickly as we can. Now, one of the options, there is a new option that's become available too. There is a new rig in the country, which is the first time, it's called a man-portable diamond rig, which could potentially allow us to do some short drill holes on some of these near-surface targets and get started quicker. But of course, we have regular drill rigs too. And so the plan basically is to push these projects in, get the drill targets, get the drill holes defined, and get through the permitting, and then get into drilling as quickly as possible. So, and as I mentioned earlier, the permitting is working in Norway. So, you know, most of the permitting has to do with obviously, you know, talking to the locals, to the landowners. This is what the work program is, making sure that people are on board with the work program. But the you know, permitting is working in Norway. And as I mentioned, because a lot of people understand mining, they actually understand what we're talking about here when we propose these work programs. So the plan is to, as quickly as we can, let's tighten up the drill targets in terms of some extra work just to fine tune what we know, then basically go into permitting and then drill as quickly as we can. So, and obviously, as I mentioned, these high grade targets are just fantastic targets for a company like us.
Okay, Eric, thank you for the update. I hope that answers a lot of those questions that came in. As always, keep sending me your questions, fleck@kereport.com, and I'll keep getting Eric to address those. Thanks for putting together this presentation here, Eric. I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Corey.